Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Show. You're listening to the first and only podcast dedicated to the business of pharmacy. Hear from independent pharmacy owners, leading entrepreneurs, political strategists, healthcare technology trends, career coaching, interviews about our pharmacy industry, and more. Be sure to subscribe to the show via iTunes and leave us a voice comment from our contact section on the website. You can find all of our episodes at pharmacypodcast.com.
Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast. I'm your co-host in 2017, focused on your career development, Erin Albert. More on me over at my website, erinalbert.com, or let's connect via Twitter. My handle there is at Erin L. Albert. Today, I am super excited to bring you our guest. His name is Marty Allain of the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, or NABP, to be known shorter. Marty has a very interesting career path that we get into in today's episode. As well, I wanted to bring him on to share with our 65,000 plus listeners more on the DOT Pharmacy Initiative and the work that NABP and other organizations are doing to shut down rogue online pharmacies. So with that, give a listen. We hope you find today's episode helpful. Marty Allain, welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I focus predominantly on career development, and I know you've got an interesting career history. So I always start with guests on how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. So I started out as an attorney, and 7 years into practicing law, Erin, I decided that it was not for me, and I won't even bother discussing the reasons.
I think we just did off camera.
We did, yeah. So you get it. And so I really honestly just stumbled across the executive director position for the Indiana Board of Pharmacy. Spent 7 years with the state of Indiana, so wore a couple of hats there. I was the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program Director, so the PDMP director is called Inspect in Indiana. And then I was the general counsel for the Professional Licensing Agency, and they oversee medical board, nursing board, pharmacy board, and so on. And so with the PDMP side of it, there was a little bit of a healthcare IT angle, and that ended up being my next job with the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, where I am now. So right now doing website verification work for NABP, and really kind of married up those two things, right? Regulatory, compliance-related issues, and healthcare IT, because we're talking about the delivery of pharmacy practice online. And that's what I do now. So it's just a typical meandering road leading me to this current setup.
Awesome. And so most of our listeners are probably familiar with NABP if they've taken the boards before as pharmacists. But for those maybe who aren't registered pharmacists, can you give us a thumbnail sketch of what NABP is and what they do?
Sure, yeah. So the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. So our members are pharmacy boards. They're colleges in Canada. So we have U.S. and Canadian regulatory boards that are our members, and so NABP been around since 1904. Pretty cool. We're from an organization that's got well over a century under its belt. We support our member boards. So our members, what do they do? I think it's the best way to describe what we do. They basically regulate the practice of pharmacy from, and not completely, right? There's a lot of agencies involved, but from the moment the pill or the drug leaves the manufacturer's doorstep to the time it ends up in a patient's hand, pharmacy boards are involved in all of that, from pharmacist licensure to pharmacy licensure and distribution, licensing with wholesale drug distributors. So it's a big, huge charge. And so NABP helps where we can. We have accreditation programs for durable medical equipment, wholesale drug distributors. We do pharmacy inspections. You just mentioned the pharmacist examination. And we also do, cut to what I'm up to now, website verification.
Yes, so that's the reason we wanted to have you on. I heard you speak up in Chicago recently on this, and it sounds like there's a lot of initiatives going on. And we've all heard, the horror stories about rogue and online pharmacies. But since you work with it day to day, Marty, can you give us a kind of overview of the size of this program or problem globally?
Yeah, so I'll start with the supply side. And just in terms of what's available out there, and there's been all this chatter about fake news in 2017 and prior to. And that's interesting to me because the world that we live in at NABP, we're dealing with fake pharmacies. tens of thousands of fake pharmacies, and I'll define fake pharmacy in a little bit. But that's the issue at hand, and so what we have are consumers that are being duped. And I think it's interesting. You look at like a Silk Roads or an organization that basically, or criminal organization that was selling heroin to people online. They're not pulling any punches. They're just telling you straight away, hey, we sell drugs online, come get me, right? Well, fake pharmacies, they're putting a white lab coat on, and they're saying, hey, we're a pharmacist, we're safe. Let me sell you these medications. So it's really a nefarious and rather kind of dirty thing, right? And so there, at any given time, kind of just to frame the issue online specifically, you got about 35 to 40,000 websites, 35 to 40,000 that are offering prescription medications to consumers. 96% of those are basically fake pharmacies. And what I mean by fake pharmacies is I mean that they're selling counterfeit medications to consumers in most cases. They don't have a license and they don't require a prescription. So it's nasty business, and if you're a consumer, it's a page one search result problem. I don't know if you've got your desktop. You do have your laptop here, Erin. Maybe we could do a little exercise in a little bit. I'd like to kind of like show folks exactly what I mean by a page one problem, because you can find these drugs really easily online.
Yeah, you had us do that in Chicago, where we kind of looked up some terms and it was right there on page one.
Yep. So if you were to try, you want to play along at home, you could do a couple of things. You could search for buy Percocet. That's an easy one, right? Low-hanging fruit. I mean, you got to figure it out. Something's going to pop up. It's not, that's a little bit not legit. But the other one that I like to bring up is buy Lipitor. And so just check it out. You're at home, not picking on any search engines. Just try any one from DuckDuckGo to Yahoo, Bing, or Google. You're going to find, when you put in buy Lipitor, you're going to see a couple of things. One, you're going to see a lot of organizations that are representing themselves as Canadian pharmacies. In some cases they are, but right now it's illegal. It's against the law to ship from a Canadian pharmacy into the U.S. That's the first part. The second is, on that list that you see from searching for buy Lipitor, you're going to see organizations that are presently being prosecuted by the Department of Justice, where we are trying in the U.S. to extradite individuals out of Canada into the U.S. to prosecute them for shipping counterfeit medications to providers in the U.S. So even when you see the word Canada or Canadian, it does not mean by any stretch that it's safe. And on that buy Lipitor search, you will in fact see on page one results where it says you can buy without a prescription.
So you addressed the supply side and the challenges there. What about the demand side?
So a recent survey just came out from the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies. That's a nonprofit organization made up of quite a few trade associations, including the American Pharmacists Association, and several others, and NABP is involved as an observer member of that group. And so they did a massive survey, 500 consumers, wanted to know exactly what's going on online with purchases of prescription meds. And what they found is that 1 in 3 consumers, 1 in 3 have already purchased medications online. So not really shocking, to the extent that we do see all forms of retail moving to online and those purchases taking place there. But I think to some extent there might be folks don't realize that also healthcare practice is moving online too, almost as quickly as everything else, right? And so 1 in 3 consumers have already done this from an online pharmacy. Half of those purchases came from pharmacies that did not have a brick and mortar store in the kind of geographic location where they made, where they purchased from. So there's a separation there. We don't need that geographic connection point to our pharmacies now when we order online. The other part of the survey, interesting, if you haven't done it, many said they were going to. Over half said, I've either bought or will buy online in the future. So it's where we're headed. So that was telling. And what's really interesting, going back to the search results and the playing at home with the buy Lipitor, is that you've got, you see the numbers here, almost 20 million consumers in the U.S. found their pharmacy from a search result.
Wow. They
didn't, they literally went online, found a pharmacy, made the purchase. I'm not saying that every one of those bought from a fake pharmacy, but if 96% of all pharmacies online are fake or rogue, or criminal in nature in some way, not a huge reach to say that many millions of Americans have been duped online.
Wow. So this is obviously a huge problem. 96%, that's an astronomical number. Can you share the history of what NABP has done, kind of looking at rogue pharmacies, how to deter them? I know it's a global problem. Shed some light on kind of the history behind NABP's involvement in shutting down rogue pharmacies.
Yeah, and to give you a little bit of context, kind of set the stage for NABP's role, I just wanted to touch on the enforcement side of it, right? And so you might say, well, hey, I've just identified through doing a search for prescription medication online, I've found a handful on page 1 of fake pharmacy, rogue sites. So why don't you just take them down? And that's the question we get a lot. And our boards of pharmacy, get the same question as well. And so here's the challenge. You're going to have someone, let's say that they reside in Mexico, they have web hosting services in Russia, they've got domain name servers in Brazil. A domain name server is basically your telephone directory, so you put in your website address, gives you the IP address back to go to that web hosting service in Russia. You've got drugs coming from India, you've got the bank that's transacting the business on behalf of the card network in Turkey. And from there, I think it's not a hard reach to understand that very, very difficult to prosecute these cases, right? So if you can't go get them, how can you regulate them? Well, the way we do it is to identify them. And I do want to make one more point. I'm throwing out a lot of context here, but I think it's important. There is an operation called Operation Pangea that happens every single year. It gets about 100 plus countries and 200 plus agencies involved, like FDA, U.S. Customs and Immigration. You've got the IPR Center, like Intellectual Property Rights Center in the U.S., and they all get together and they bring down between 2,500 and 3,500 sites a year. That's awesome, right? I mean, they truly do coordinate on a massive level to make this happen. The problem is that 600 new fake pharmacies pop up every single month, regardless of Operation Pangea or not. I mean, these are just cropping up over and over again, and there's a ton of reasons for that. But they want to basically maximize their search engine optimization. They want to be on page 1 and so on and so forth. So it's a big challenge. So the state boards came to us almost 20 years ago, back in 1999, and they said, okay, we can't manage this the way we'd like to. Can you help NABP? And that's what our role is. And so we stood up our first website verification program. It was called VIPS, probably the most well-known verified internet pharmacy practice. And so VIPS was stood up, and then it was recognized by our boards in their statute and rules. And they said, listen, if you're going to ship into our state, you're going to need to have VIPS. And there are parameters around that. It's not just a one-to-one. If you ship, then you must have VIPS. But certainly it is a requirement in some circumstances to have VIPS. And what we saw happen along with that is we had different iterations of website verification programs, is that private organizations that are dealing with this issue, like Google, Bing, Yahoo, Visa, they said, hey, why don't we go ahead and require the same things the states require? We'll mitigate our risk. And so you've got all the organizations I just mentioned currently require NABP website verification to do business with them. In the case of Visa, to be a pharmacy merchant and do a card not present transaction, got to have NABP verification. In the case of Google, to advertise in AdWords, you got to have our verification as well.
So not to geek out too much on civil procedure, the law geek in me's got to say that
let's try it.
Venue and jurisdiction from a civil procedure perspective has got to be an absolute nightmare when it comes to shutting down rogue pharmacies.
Absolutely, that's the big issue. So like I said before, you've got the U.S. officials trying to extradite Canadian pharmacy owners right now. In that case, they do have a license in Canada, can't ship in the U.S., but they did, and they shipped counterfeit meds, and so that case is going to go on for years. Yeah, it's two countries that get along.
Yeah, right? We won't even go down the road of the ones that don't.
That we don't get along with, right? So yeah, it's a huge hurdle to clear, and so instead of whacking them all across the board, maybe we can just go ahead and identify the safe ones, and that's where we see things that are where we're headed.
So had to geek there for a minute for the lawyers out there. Shout out. So the reason I had or wanted you to come on, Marty, was to talk about this kind of newer initiative, the .pharmacy initiative with NABP. So VIPS was kind of the first iteration of trying to create legitimate pharmacies. Let's talk about .pharmacy.
Yeah, so VIPS is like I said, been around for a long time. We had other iterations of website verification that we've stood up over the years. But the big challenge with any of our website verification programs, Erin, was that we used seals, service marks, logos, icons, whatever you want to call them. You go to any website, people like to slap on some type of seal of approval to recognize themselves as legitimate in some way, which makes sense. It's the kind of, we're all accustomed to that in the U.S. in terms of just engaging retail in general. We like our seals. The problem is, if you've ever done a PowerPoint presentation, you may have on occasion gone online and done a right click and
Never.
and pasted that into your PowerPoint, right?
No.
It happens. So same thing happens with these criminal organizations. And so the best example that I can use right now is the European Union has something called the Common Logo, and they stood this up to basically recognize safe pharmacies, just like we have done over the years. And some of the first users of the EU Common Logo in Europe were criminal organizations. So,
well, at least they're proactive.
Listen, kudos to them for knowing what was going on in the regulatory space, right? And like just jumping on board and cutting and pasting. And so that didn't work. And so let's get to .pharmacy. It's the .pharmacy Verified Websites program. I help manage that particular program, and what we've done is it's our attempt at a technical solution. And so in lieu of looking for a seal, how about looking to the right of the dot, right? Same way you look at .edu or .gov. You know when you go to those places, you know you're safe. So what if, and this is what we're doing, as NABP owns and operates the .pharmacy domain name, what if you were to see .pharmacy? At that moment, you know you're going to be in a safe place, a licensed organization that's allowed to ship to you, that's doing business properly. And so that's the hope or the objective behind the domain name. We do understand too, it's not easy to move from a .com to .pharmacy. A ton of reasons around why an organization might not want to do that. So we still just simply verify and provide lists for organizations like Visa and Google to leverage for the reasons we've already talked about. So, .pharmacy is, we're hoping 5 years down the road, or at some point, and we already have pharmacies moving in that direction, that you'll see more and more use of the .pharmacy domain name, and then consumers in turn will also recognize that's a safe place, just like they do .gov and .edu. And really interesting, the American Heart Association just sent out educational materials about doing a better job of identifying safe places online to get good healthcare information, right, specific to heart-related issues in that case. And one of the points they made is you can feel safe at a .edu or .gov. Okay, well, you can feel safe at a .pharmacy too.
So what must legitimate pharmacies with an online presence do to comply with this new .pharmacy initiative? And I guess when did the .pharmacy initiative really start?
Took off in 2014,
okay.
And what we've done basically is we're taking out or removing or closing down our legacy programs and moving to .pharmacy. Not exclusively, VIPS will still be around, and I'll really kind of focus on the term NABP website verification, because that's what's happening in all these different programs that we do have. And we do ask that our VIPS organizations do use the .pharmacy domain name, at least as a redirect or a web forward. So we're really trying to gently push people in that direction. But if you wanted one, if you wanted to advertise with Google or needed it for Visa's new policy on card not present transactions, you go to the safe.pharmacy site. You apply online. We're looking for basic corporate information and license information. What we will do then, once you apply, is we're going to look at your entire website page by page. We want to make sure that you're providing good information to consumers. You're not using terms that the FDA frowns on, like bioidentical. We want to make sure that you aren't affiliated with a rogue site. You do see legitimate pharmacies who might have some type of connection to an organization, less so in the U.S., but I mean, it does happen. .pharmacy is a global program, so there's that component to it as well. We are offering it globally and working with healthcare regulators in each country to make sure that we are abiding by their pharmacy standards when we do approve somebody. So you give us all this information, we review your website, we make sure that your licenses are, you're covered on your license side, and from there we approve you. Put you on the list, and you register a .pharmacy domain name, and you're on your way.
And you guys are working with ICANN too on the IT side, right?
Yeah, so we had to apply to ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers.
Okay.
So
Yep.
ICANN is the basically manages the domain name space for the entire globe. I think if you're not familiar with ICANN, you may have heard Obama's giving away the internet. Right? Okay. That's what they were talking about. ICANN now is run by multi-stakeholder organizations, no longer really run by the United States at this point. But so we applied to ICANN. We got the .pharmacy domain name. NABP is the exclusive provider of .pharmacy. Probably need to slip that in. Nobody else can give you .pharmacy except us, and that's the mechanism and how you get it by applying with us.
So you're not going to go to your internet provider or hosting site and just pick up a .pharmacy URL, right?
You're right, yeah, and that really goes to the heart of it being secure, right?
Right.
This is much more challenging than a right-click on a seal or a service mark, okay? I mean, so, can you do something with the domain name and maybe, maybe, right? Technically, it's not going to be up for long. We're in control of this space at NABP because it's our domain name, and we'll take you down if you're doing something wrong.
So you mentioned the American Heart Association, but we have a lot of pharmacists that listen to this podcast. So what can pharmacists do in the U.S. to help spread this initiative?
So at this point, Erin, this is just what we're gathering as we continue down this path of verifying websites and really talking and framing the issue, is we want to educate. And so this is great to be on this podcast. I know you've got a wide reach when it comes to the pharmacy community. And just to share, first and foremost, hey, we've got a problem. I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and we talked about just the complexity of pharmacy in general. From a business and regulatory perspective, it's challenging to get your arms around. I know pharmacists are dealing with a lot of different things right now, and pharmacy owners as well. But if there's a chance, once you kind of get a hold of this information and you feel like you understand the gravity of it and the breadth of it, share it with your patients. Just let them know. I mean, I've got anecdote, and some of them embarrassing anecdotes, quite frankly, about family members and friends who even knew what I was doing for a living, who they've got a GP, they know how to get a prescription, but they make that bad decision of saying, well, I'm going to make it easy on myself, and I'm just going to order something online. And that false sense of security that comes from a place that makes themselves look like they're a real pharmacy exists. And even though you kind of know you're doing something wrong, maybe, you still do it. And so I think kind of it's an unspoken issue. And if pharmacists were to bring it up and say, hey, don't be careful online. Just go to a safe place. And safe.pharmacy is a place you can go to find a list of verified websites that NABP is taking a look at, and they're doing the right thing.
Perfect segue, because that's my next question.
Right,
what can patients do to ensure that they're going to legit places and not #fake pharmacies?
Yeah, and I do want to mention something else. The Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacy has a great educational effort going on right now with healthcare providers and pharmacists. You can go to buysaferx.pharmacy, and get some wonderful information about the issue and about what you can share with your patients as well. And what would you share with them? That's your question. Yeah, right. For us, it's go to safe.pharmacy. We're going to have, once we finish some transitioning, and as applications continue to come in, we're going to have by the end of 2018 over 400 organizations that have been approved by us. Some of them with multiple websites that we have verified. So there is a rather long list of safe places you can go at safe.pharmacy, specifically the buying safely portion of that site. So now take a look at it. If you have any doubts, right, if you're second guessing yourself at all, you can eliminate those doubts by checking out that list at safe.pharmacy.
Perfect. And we'll have links in the show notes that Marty's suggesting as well. Where can anyone go to learn more about the initiative of rogue pharmacies overall, and kind of places or what NABP and other organizations are doing to mitigate those? Yeah,
and back to our website that I mentioned a couple of times, and also the buysaferx.pharmacy is another one. That's the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies that I've talked about. And so those are two great places to find resources. And within both of those websites, you're going to find public service announcements that we think do a really good job of framing the issue in 15-second, 30-second, 60-second spots. And so if you get a chance, if you take a look at those and you're like, hey, this is an issue that maybe we want to focus on as an organization, if you're part of an organization out there that is addressing certain public health issues, post back to our site. I mean, link back to us, reference it. We'd love to talk to you more about what's going on in this space and what we're trying to do to protect the public. So there's some opportunity there to keep getting the word out.
So Marty, what is your best preferred way for people to connect with you?
So back to safe.pharmacy. I think I probably said it too many times now.
That's all right.
Information at safe.pharmacy is a great place to go. We've got contact information on the website as well. Send us an email. Just even if you're just curious about what the issue is and some of the challenges we're facing, what we're trying to do to help out in the space, we're happy to talk to you. One of our key initiatives in all of this is education, trying to help people figure out exactly what's going on and that we've got a problem. It's not going to get better. I mean, there's going to be, if you spend $1,000 on a fake pharmacy and you're a criminal, you make $30,000 back. Without question, hands down, the biggest moneymaker in counterfeit trade that you can get into. So
not education that way, though. We don't go there.
Well, hey, listen, but it's about right. End on that note, But that's the thing is that the motivation is there. It's clear from the supply side and the demand side both, and so we've got to figure something out. And we think .pharmacy and website verification is going to be a key component in trying to mitigate some of these issues.
Well, Marty Allain, thanks so much for your work. I think it sounds like it's a huge problem. I'm still shocked by the 96% of pharmacies being online not being legit. I think that's scary. So kudos to NABP, and really excited to have you as part of the podcast because, to your point, education I think is key here. And so, Marty Allain, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I love your podcast. It's awesome. It's extremely helpful to listen to it week in and week out. So I'm just glad we had a chance to come on and talk about the issue. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Pharmacy Podcast. Again, my name is Erin Albert, and I have loved delivering to you all, 65,000 and growing listeners, more on career development in pharmacy, and now is a great time to explore different career avenues. I'm happy to address as well any of your questions, or if you'd like me to go down the rabbit hole, if you will, in a certain area of pharmacy practice for career development. Of course, you can always leave us feedback at Pharmacy Podcast on Twitter, or you can hit me directly via Twitter at Erin Albert. And before I go today, I need to ask you a small favor. Right now, we have a panel picker open for South by Southwest 2018. And part of getting a panel to South by Southwest, one of the largest conferences in social media and interactive media in Austin, Texas each spring, the audience at large has to vote on panel pickers. So if you could take 30 seconds and go over to tinyurl/SXWW3, that is the link to our panel picker on Wonder Women, single women entrepreneurs in America, and it's focused around my next and forthcoming book on single women entrepreneurs. So if you could take those 30 seconds, go vote. I'll put the link in show notes as well. We would really appreciate the vote, and hopefully I'll see some of you, if not all of you, at Austin, Texas next spring for South by Southwest 2018. Thanks again so much for listening. We can't do what we do without you. We welcome the feedback. Please give it to us. And until next time, I'm Erin Albert.